On August 21st, Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob sworn in as the 9th Prime Minister. More than 100 days have passed now. The new administration has been relentless in managing the country's pandemic-stricken economy and safeguarding the people's well-being. How has the government fared so far? I'm Muhammad Ahmad Hamdan and this is Money Matters. Good evening and welcome to Money Matters. Today we're joined by Economist, Professor Dr. Geoffrey Williams, who is also Malaysia University of Science and Technology's Dean of Institute of Postgraduate Studies. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Good evening. Nice to be here.
Great. Now, the government, the cabinet ministers, according to the Prime Minister, which made the announcement recently, have scored about 90% in their overall performance in the first 100 days of the current administration. A period of 100 days, is it sufficient to gauge performance?
It's not, of course. I mean, if you're a management consultant, often they would have this type of 100-day period for a new CEO or somebody like that. But we're not talking about that, are we, when we're talking about the government, and particularly for this government? We're talking about more of a change of Prime Minister rather than a change of government, because most of the ministers in office are very much the same as they were before.
Same coalition.
Health Minister has changed. It's a very significant change, but most of the others are the same people. So we're not really talking about the start of a new government in that sense. We're talking about the continuation of the same government with a different Prime Minister. And mostly, I would say that from an economics perspective, we're not interested in quick wins in the way that you might be from a management consultant perspective, or evaluating a CEO. You're interested in what can you get quickly. From an economics perspective, we're not so concerned about that. We're concerned about, have you got the right policies? Are you putting them into place properly? And what do we expect in terms of the outcome? You can't judge that in 100 days. It's too short.
But just for the sake of it, from 1 to 10, how would you rate the administration's first 100 days? Well,
having said we shouldn't do it, if you ask me how we should do it, I would put it in the middle, 5 or 6.
And why is that?
Yeah, I mean, if it was an academic score, a lower second or upper second, last degree, something like that. But that's only because of what I just said.
Sure.
You need a longer period of maturity in order to be able to evaluate the outcomes of the policy. The policy outcomes are not expected to be achieved in 30 days, sorry, 100 days, they're 3 months. The policy outcomes are expected to be achieved over longer periods, so we need to wait to see.
Right. Now, there have been mixed views on the government's 100 days achievement of performance. Some industry players acknowledge that the government has made some good progress in managing the country's pandemic-stricken economy. There are also views that more could have been done. What's your take on both of these views?
Well, I'm not sure who are the guys saying that the management of the pandemic or the management of the lockdown has been a success, because it hasn't. It hasn't been a success. Not particularly under this Prime Minister, because as I've said, he's only just had a very short period. But since the pandemic, from March of last year, when we had the first lockdowns, all the way through to now, the outcomes of that policy are very clear for us to see. The economy has had 2 recessions in 2 years. The third quarter GDP results for 2021 show we had a second recession. We had a recession during 2020. Tens of thousands of companies have closed. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their jobs. Millions of people have wiped out their pensions. 6 million people have nothing in account 1 in EPF, and 9 million have nothing in account 2 in EPF. More than 7 million people have taken out money from their EPF and depleted their overall EPF savings. I'm not really sure how you can see that that is a successful policy outcome. I mean, last year the economy contracted by 5.6%. Actually, it was more like 9.6%, because the effect of government stimulus packages raised GDP. So actually the total contraction was nearly 10%, and then the final outcome was about 5.6%. This year, we're waiting for the final result for Q4. But I don't think that we're going to see a particularly healthy figure. We may be in positive territory, but nowhere close to what was predicted in January of 2021, when the government, Bank Negara, World Bank were all saying it could
Why do you think it's that we could not achieve the target set earlier? Because
at the beginning of this year, 2021, we were expecting the rollout of the vaccine would offer a solution.
Right.
Clearly not going to end the virus. The vaccine doesn't end the virus. But the idea was that it would offer us a solution in terms of opening up the economy, and we would get back to normal more quickly. And we just haven't seen that. You know, we have seen continuation in restrictions, stricter SOPs, lockdown for the part of the year. And that has meant that although we were hoping to see this rebound in 2021, at this time in January, we didn't get it because of the outcome of the progression of the pandemic and the outcome of the progression of the vaccination program and the outcome of the policy which followed that.
But now with the Omicron in the equation, how do you think that will, affect the country's economy moving forward?
Well, I think it looks a bit like déjà vu all over again.
Right.
Because, as I said, in January of 2021, coming out of December 2020, we hoped that there would be a solution. Then, coming all the way through to December 2021 now, we had thought that we were getting through that, and we were hoping to go into the endemic phase, and things would get a little easier right across the board, and then suddenly we get the new variant. Now, we've only had information about this new variant just for a few weeks, and we're still not sure.
Right.
Some of the information suggests that it may not be so bad, but then some of the medical experts are saying we have to wait and see. You have to be, an abundance of caution.
Okay, now we're going to go for a quick commercial break. We're still going to talk a little bit about the Cabinet Minister's 100 days performance when we return in just a moment, so don't go away. Welcome back, and you're still with us on Money Matters as we speak with Economist Professor Dr. Geoffrey Williams. Now, Professor, back on the Cabinet Minister's 100-day achievement, the 90% score was derived from a ministry's core service, given 50% weightage, minister's performance assessment at 25%, and the rest is public perception on minister and ministry at 25%. Do you think these focuses were spot on? Which one of these do you think need more focus?
I think, again, this is a management consultant dashboard, right? And the truth of it is, when we're judging policy, we really want to look only at the policy outcomes. So public perception and the minister's performance are affected by matters which are not really to do with the policy. I mean, the perception of the minister could be because he has a good personality, he has a good strategic communications process, he's a good politician. He speaks well in the Dewan and he speaks well in the newspapers. And that's really not related to whether the policy was effective or not. And similarly, public perception depends upon the question of how much information do they actually have in order to be able to take a view about the policy. If it's something that affects their wallet, something that affects them on a daily basis, then clearly they're going to be very well informed about that. But if it's some distant policy about some public works or something like that, they're not going to be able to make an judgment.
Now, nearly 600,000 M40 households have fallen into the B40 category due to COVID-19. There have been various initiatives to assist those hit by the pandemic. Will the initiatives rolled out so far be able to assist these more than 500,000 households?
Well, many people say that the pandemic has hit the B40 harder than the M40, right? But I think the type of statistics that you've just mentioned help us to understand that it's not always true to say that the biggest group who are hit in the worst way are the poorest people. People in the M40 group have also been hit very hard. And if they lose their job, this has a much bigger impact on them in many cases, because these guys, being in the M40, will have a mortgage. They will have a higher level of loans for a car or credit card. They might send their kids to private school, for example, and have fees to pay, or sending their kids to university and have fees to pay. And when there's a sudden, sharp disruption in their job, in their salary and in their income, that can hit them very, very hard indeed, because they have this massive burden suddenly. So when we're looking at how we can help people in that situation and ask the question, what are the various policies that are put into place, are they going to be helping people who are in that sort of shocking situation where one day you're earning tens of thousands, the next day you literally have no income, no job, nowhere to go, but a car loan and a mortgage, multiple cars or something like that. Then you need to ask the question, has the policy been directed toward solving those type of policies, those type of problems? And I think it hasn't. Right. I have to say it hasn't. There are multiple initiatives, but to me, they're far too general. You see, this is a general problem about government policy overall, which is to say, with the best will in the world, the civil servants and the politicians and the people who advise them try to create projects to help particular targeted groups. But they do this from Putrajaya. They don't do this in Ipoh, they don't do it in Johor or Penang. They don't know how the COVID pandemic has affected you, or affected me, or affected any of the people in the room. They don't know that. You know, I know, they know. And so the policy designers are trying to create packages which they think might help particular types of groups. But then there are so many different ways in which people have been impacted. And I've made the observation that during the COVID period, everybody hurt one way or another, but in different ways. And so the policy design of targeting particular groups with particular packages doesn't really fit, because it's not specifically aimed at what's affecting you.
And it also, Professor, does not help that prices of goods are going up. People are talking about prices of goods, that things are getting pretty expensive these days. What do you think the government's response to this situation. The Prime Minister said that by next year, things are going to get better.
Well, in terms of prices, I think he's right, actually, because although there is talk of higher inflation globally, we can see that there is higher inflation globally. And here in Malaysia, we have seen higher inflation earlier in the year. But then the governor of Bank Negara told us we were going to see that. It's a petroleum effect, primarily. But now we are seeing two additional effects. One is the removal of the subsidy on utilities, particularly electricity.
Right.
And the second is food prices. And we know that food prices have gone up because of supply chain issues. Now, what can the government do in this case? I think the government can do what it's doing. What the government is doing in terms of helping to control prices is probably the best policy under the current circumstances, because this is a transitory increase in just three elements of the CPI. If you look at core inflation is actually pretty flat. And if you look at the inflation measures when you take out the effect of petrol, it's also pretty flat. So helping to control prices is one way of addressing the problem in the short term, because you can very quickly take it away.
Right.
You see, you can put in the price control and then you can take the price control away very quickly. Another way, of course, is to help people to accommodate the increase in prices, and that means putting more money into people's pockets. Yeah.
OK, we're going to go for another quick commercial break. When we return, we'll talk more on Malaysia's road to recovery. Stay tuned. Thanks for staying with us. Professor, in order to create a better and vibrant economy, the government may need to focus on a long-term change. Do you think that Malaysia needs to create a new approach, one that not driven by ideas of international development agencies like the World Bank? How can this be done?
I think that there needs to be a change because the economy has gone through a pretty difficult structural break, as how economists would describe it, which means that the economy now is very different to how it was even just a few months ago or years ago before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So we need, in my view, to step back a little bit and try to understand what has changed, and in particular, which are transitory changes which we expect will recover as the economy recovers, and which will not recover or which won't recover quickly.
Okay.
And I think amongst some of the key elements that we've seen where there are some acute areas which need immediate attention are, of course, in social protection. We've seen that so many people have been hit very hard by the impact of the lockdowns in particular, and they found that they just didn't have the resources available themselves personally. They don't have the savings, for example. Mm. They don't have the resources personally to look after their own welfare. Mm. And then when they rely upon the government doesn't have a system either, or not a particularly well-developed system. And this is very commonly understood and commonly acknowledged, that the welfare system in Malaysia is not particularly designed in the way that you would expect to see, for example, in Europe, in Germany, or somewhere like that, where they have a very universal system of social protection.
Professor, I still want to ask you a little bit on the 100-day report card. Do you think it matters to foreign investors? You know, will it be able to attract more investors to the country?
I don't think that foreign investors look at the Malaysian government and say, how did they do in the last 100 days? Mm-hmm. They are much more interested in the look and the feel of Malaysia as an investment source. I mean, there are two types of investment, right? A financial investment are just interested in what's going on in Bursa and the stock market and that sort of thing. And they're looking at it at the moment and they're not seeing very good returns. So they have better returns elsewhere. And also globally, they have
so many better options.
Better options. But when you're talking about foreign direct investment, where they're going to be putting bricks and mortar investment in factories, and they're going to be hiring people and bringing their own managers and that sort of thing, it is very much a matter of the look and the feel of the environment into which they're going to be bringing their business. And I think that has changed quite significantly. I've been here for 18 years, and I would say perceptibly that has changed. It used to be very, very positive. Now I'm afraid it's not so positive. And another thing that has changed significantly over the course of that almost 2 decades that I've been here is that there are emerging alternatives in other countries. In Indonesia, for example, in Vietnam, even in Philippines. So when I came here, people would never say, I will go to Indonesia in preference to Malaysia. Now, of course, they will look at what's happening in Indonesia and say, it's 9 times the population, 270 million people compared to roughly 30 million, it's 9 times bigger. And so if they're thinking about significant bricks and mortar investment, they have a bigger market there. Similarly, Vietnam, when I came here, Vietnam was very closed. Now it's opened up in the course of that 20-year period, and they have also a much bigger population than Malaysia. And so they will look first at the opportunities to invest, the policy environment, which have improved in both of take those 2 countries as examples. The opportunities to invest have improved. The policy environment has improved. They are very much bigger domestic markets. The education system has improved. The number of people in the middle class has improved. Their incomes have increased. So they have not just a larger population, but they have a population of people who are able to spend more. So Malaysia has to deal with that. So it's not such a question of Malaysia having moved down, it's a question of these other countries having moved up.
Okay, but going forward, what challenges do you think lie ahead for Malaysia to achieve the high income status in probably less than 5 years, which was targeted by the government? Okay,
well, first let me tell you about the high income status. This high income status thing is really not something that Malaysia should be aiming for. The high income status is a World Bank classification. And actually, it's used to determine which countries will get development aid and which countries will not get development aid. And that's really its purpose. It's not really an indicator as to the quality of the growth that you have achieved or whether it's well distributed across your population. There's no indication of income inequality in a high growth target. And I remember when we were doing our assessment of the 10th Malaysia Plan, which was introduced in 2010, and we did a midterm assessment in 2012. And that was when they set out this target of getting to the high income level by 2020. And we said then there was basically no chance of doing that in that period. And they didn't, in fact, in the end. They didn't get there. So I personally am not an advocate of Malaysia saying we should be in the high income category. Because it doesn't make any economic sense. There isn't any economic content to that idea. You will see very many countries that are in the high income category but have massively different characteristics in terms of how they got there. Some got there through oil, some got there through finance, some got there through manufacturing. So they have massive differences in how they got there, massive differences in terms of the distribution of income, massive differences in terms of quality of life. Actually, the United States is clearly a high income economy, but it's also one of the most inequitable in terms of income distribution. So we shouldn't necessarily see just the per capita income as being the target. We need to look at quality of growth. And that's why in coming out of the pandemic, excuse me, it's really quite important to have this national conversation, to have a national conversation about what is it that Malaysians want to see post-pandemic.
Right.
And part of this conversation will be, what do you want to see in terms of healthcare? Do you want to see more investment in public healthcare or easier access to private healthcare or combination of both? What do you want to see in education? Do you want to continue with this mix of public universities and private universities with big debts in PT, PTN, or do you want to change that? What do you want to see in terms of social protection we mentioned before? How are you going to solve the problem of pensions? Now, when you have that type of environment, which is much more progressive and much more open to what the people want in terms of their aspirations, in terms of their life, then this idea of what will foreign investors see, they will then be clearer about what are the investment opportunities there in Malaysia, which is the direction that Malaysia is going.
Sounds like a lot of work and still a long way to go for Malaysia. Now, Professor Williams, we thank you once again for joining us on Money Matters this evening. We appreciate your time and insights on the programme.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, thanks for watching. Do join us again next week, same day and time, for more money insights that matter. Until then, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. Thank you for watching and stay safe.